Hello, my name is Jerome Weckendorp. This is a video account of a kind of an impromptu do-it-yourself sauna build that sort of commenced late November 2021 and essentially got wrapped up in June of 2022. This is my second sauna construction. The first one was built 1990 indoors, powered by natural gas. Subsequently, I moved and had to leave the sauna behind, so I moved to an infrared sauna, which I still have, which I still like, which still has a purpose. But the hunkering for a dry wood-fired sauna sort of came back, and it turns out my neighbor grew up with a dry sauna, and so he and I kind of collaborated and went over a variety of scenarios. Long and the short was that I decided to proceed and go ahead with a build of my own. Number of things already on this image that will stand out is that the sauna is fed from the outside, and I think, and this is based on a recommendation of my neighbor, by the way, I think this is the way to go. There's a safety issue that has been taken care of. The combustible oxygen, or the oxygen needed for combustion, is coming from the outside, not from the inside. And it keeps things nice and clean on the inside as well. You do lose heat, but I think it's a price well worth paying given the benefits. Also, this unit is not on a permanent foundation. It was meant to be moved, and it has been moved. Sometimes the functional location does not match the jurisdictional location, and the two do need to match. But yeah, so we have a little privacy fence here and a little pathway to the neighbor. But let's go into the process here. I made a variety of sketches, and I'm not going to bore you with all the varieties, but conceptually, I think this is important. Kind of gives you a sense of the layout. The unit ends up being smaller than you think, because as you start building the inside out with insulation and siding and whatnot, you sacrifice space. Right from the get-go, I can tell you that this is an 8 by 10. If I had to redo it, it would have been an 8 by 12. The dressing room would have been wider, and I might have gained another 6 to 8 inches in the sauna itself. Is it critical? No, not critical. This is just, anytime you build anything, you're going to say, oh man, had I known this or that or the other, I would have made a change. However, in 2021, lumber prices were insane, and I think I timed the market in this insanity relatively well, even though 2x4s are still pushing $4, because a month later they were back at $7.80. Now, if you look at the price per wall, floor, ceiling, you can pause the video here and look at the prices. So they are specific for third week of November 21. Notice that I went on in this case, the Menards website, and looked at the SKU numbers, and based on my drawings, I was able to come up with what I thought was a pretty good inventory to build the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and then I was able to put a cost to it. And you're looking at $2,400, and of course taxes, and then in case of Menards, the 11% rebate, all of that. Had we done this 2 years ago, I think the price would have been half. But you know, I think as the time of this recording, prices are higher again. So you sort of have to decide, you know, what are we going to wait, or are we going to do something? And I think, all things considered, I timed it relatively well. This list is also nice once you have all of this, so that when you go to the lumber barn at, you know, Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards, you can basically mark off what it is that you have gotten so far. And in this case, you know, this is a 1-ton Chevy van, and it took 2 trips. And even then, I can tell you, there have been at least 24 trips to Home Depot nearby to get other things. And the price has, you know, gone up with that. Just on nails, screws, and glue, I think that bill was well over $400. The total project consumed over 2,000 screws, 5 or 6 tubes of glue, and about 2,000 brats. Probably one of the top items to consider is, you know, how you're going to power this. And I think the smallest available, correctly shaped wood stove will do the trick. Notice that, you know, this item is still available. I got it at Tractor Supply on a discount for $2.99. I think it was a closeout model. What really drew my attention was that the unit being fed from the smallest part. So you don't get to see this on the inside, but it still gave you quite a bit of radiant surface on either side, the back, top, and bottom. And the legs could come off, which they needed to come off for the insulation. So quite a bit of flexibility. And of course, they have instructions regarding isolation distances and safeties and this, that, and the other. For a typical residential install, that does need to be taken into consideration during a sauna, but given the cement board and metal reflective surfaces, I think the accidental combustion becomes possible, but has turned out to be not an issue. So since I wanted to be able to move this sauna, I overbuilt the foundation. I doubled up the 2x6s, as you can see right there, and I anchored the corners with 4x4s along with these heavy-duty hooks, and then I ended up screwing and gluing and using joist hangers and nailing from the outside, or screwing from the outside in, sandwiching the floor and insulating it R19, since the floor is sitting off the ground. But you know, it has done a pretty good job, and you can see, you know, the glue is here spread, and then the boards are laid in place, and they are screwed back and forth, creating this base with the hooks, and so it's kind of a sandwiched foundation between 2 sheets of 1/2-inch treated ply with a floor drain, and I allowed for a 1/8 of an inch taper on these floor joists, so that there's a nice runoff to the center. And you know, I used just a regular shower drain, extended with a PVC pipe all the way through to the bottom plate as well. So this then becomes the only source of fresh air in the sauna, because the air for combustion is coming from the outside. Okay, we're laying out the walls here. And you can see already, the main sauna space and then the changing space. Then I proceeded with the ceiling and the roof. Due to lumber prices, I did not go with a 2x12, which would have been the normal approach. And I think in the process I was fortuitous in that I created two separate structures, the ceiling and then a tapered roof, and then the roof itself. And so 2x4s. But in the process, there's always kind of a silver lining sometimes. There is no thermal bridging between the ceiling and the roof. So I was able to capitalize on this space from a roof insulation point of view. I have a pole barn / hangar, retired hangar, because I don't have an airplane. Former owner did. So I was able to dry fit the construction inside. This is after work. This is after dark. This is on weekends, and it was nice to be able to work inside. So able to dry fit most parts, squaring the corners, putting at least one sheet of exterior siding on to keep things in place. And notice I have the foundation on these steel poles, so I was able to roll it back and forth, so it provided me the space around there to work depending on what side I was working on. Night before the initial placement, hauled all the pieces outside. So it's winter time, it's cold, it's freezing, but you're kind of motivated because the big day is there. Kind of put the foundation in place, put up the walls, relatively easy because they already had been dry fitted. Space for the wood stove, and then there's the ceiling already with the 6-inch taper. Then again, my neighbor who grew up with the saunas, he sort of was the eyes and ears of the project along with my own input, but he also provided assistance with his Kubota. And this could have been done by hand, but this was so much easier, and especially for the roof with the 12-inch overhang. Now the structure became significant, but that Kubota was able to lift about 1,000 pounds. And what is the total weight of this whole thing? Gosh, I don't know. I would say maybe 3,000 pounds, plus or minus. So definitely movable. Well, I designed the roof so that it would take a double layer of 1-inch high-density foam, giving you R12. This is the inside look, and already again you can see the lack of thermal bridging here, and I think there's about 14-inch, 15-inch space, which I ended up filling up with regular fiberglass, and then at the bottom again I went with another layer of R6 high-density foam, all taped up very carefully. Roofing was done with OSB, and I used a roofing material that with a 200,000 BTU torch, you were able to melt the backing of this roofing material. The stuff starts bubbling, and then you roll it out and you walk on it, and it merges really well with the OSB. It kind of becomes one contiguous layer. I know that because when I cut out the hole for the chimney, it was a nice layer of roofing integrated into the wood. And here's the completed surface. Okay, then you move on, and kind of a nervous moment because now we're cutting a hole and a brand new roof. But that disc that I cut out demonstrated to me that the roofing really had bonded well with the OSB. So I think that roof is good for quite a few years. The double wall chimney here, of course, is critical, essential. You don't want to continue just with a single wall. You're talking about temperatures as high as 900 degrees on this single wall, 900 degrees Fahrenheit. And the double wall does an excellent job reducing that. I did some dry fires before I closed up the ceiling, and I don't think the double wall exceeded much of 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Even so, I flanked all the exposed wood here on the inside with cement board, and then again cement board, and the insulation, of course, would be highly flammable. But I taped that up with additional reflective material. So, we had a mishap where we got the sauna unintentionally up to 270 degrees, and none of this stuff decided to give in. So that turned out really well. Again, the insulation space there, no thermal bridging. Then already the first tweak, if we look here, I was able to push this up about 8 inches because, as it turns out, in January I had snow already right up to this chimney cap. I said, I suppose if you build a fire, the snow would melt and all of that, but I did not need it for the draft because it's a straight shot, so no elbows, no draft issues there. But why not give it the extra space? I had zero snow melt at all, except for a little bit of melting around underneath the snow here at the boot, and that's why I added the second layer right there, putting that second layer of roofing over the metal ring here, which was just sort of sitting there by itself. So it is sandwiched in relatively nicely. So then there is the installation of the wood stove itself. As I mentioned, the legs had to come off to push it through, which worked fine. And the proponents of people say keep everything inside because you'll have more energy, which is true. But as I pointed out, you have combustion air and you have embers on the inside. This is nice. Cleaning out ashes. Yes, you have to go to the outside to feed the furnace, but you're not hauling firewood inside either. So I think, and this is really, one of the most valuable recommendations I got from my neighbors, that keep all that stuff outside. And if you do a calculation, it said, 13% of the radiant surface is actually outside. Well worth it. Some modifications. Front door needed a tweak for the air inlet. There is a second air inlet at the bottom that had to be terminated because otherwise I would still be feeding the inside with inside air. So underneath here, so all of the air is coming from the outside. Obviously, for a residential application, you would not do that. This stove was rated to heat a space of 900 square feet. During a traditional use for the sauna, well, what is the space? If it's 8 by 8, it is not 8 by 8. It's 64 square feet, so less than 10% of the rated surface. Keep in mind that, when the sauna sits outside and, it's 10 below Fahrenheit or, it's minus 20 C, it takes a long time for that superstructure to heat up. But this unit you're talking about hour and a half, at the most, which that's what it is. And I don't think that would make any difference if you had a different setup. So I doubled up here as well. So you got 2 layers of cement board, a little bit of air gap helping with the insulation. And then, I tweaked the airflow. So you go into production mode. You start up cutting slices of insulation for the wall, for the ceiling. I had R30 slices of R30 in the ceiling. So I think that in the final analysis, the walls are R20 plus, and the ceiling at the highest point would be an R80. And then again, my neighbor, based on the previous sauna build that he had done, was able to rip some 2x4s and router those into nice benches. I actually have a couple of monitors inside my sauna. It's about 150 feet from the house. So I can keep track of what the temperature is 24/7, with or without the heat. And I am able to also, I have a second sensor in my kitchen. When I light the stove, it lets me know what the inside temperature is. So I don't have to, babysit it for the first hour or hour and a half. And, depending on the season, you learn how to gauge that. Obviously, it got away from me once because we were standing outside kind of shooting, just having a conversation, and I opened the main door and smoke poured out because the pitch at 270 was coming out of all the knotty pine, and but everything was fine. Just open up a few windows and a door and let the smoke from the pitch dissipate, and things were fine again. But the heat retention is good. It's hours. It's not unusual in the wintertime to have a sauna at 10 or 11 at night and come back the next morning at 7 and have the sauna still be well over 100 degrees. And in the summertime, it's even crazier. So I think the objective here was achieved in terms of the kind of over-the-top insulation and tightness. And in the winter, I had not added the heatsink on top of the wood stove yet. And that heatsink also, it will add to the heating up process, but once you get it up to temperature, it is much easier to stay there. So here we have the sauna in place, or at least the wood stove in place, rudimentary. Installing the fiberglass bat with the reflective insulation, taping all the seams, and then going over the top one more time with the 1-inch rigid R6, and then going over the top one more time with these 1/4-inch bats. And again, taping all the seams, having the bats on the roof, and then you can move on to kind of pointing out the obvious here. You can move on to the siding, and again, the floor drain. If it's 0 or below 0, if it's minus 20 C out, you're not going to grab a bucket and dump it over your head outside. I mean, you can walk outside and be fine, but having a bucket with water inside is also very nice, and you can just literally take a 3-gallon bucket and pour it over your head, and the water pours out just as quickly as you can pour it. The nail gun was essential in terms of speed. You can sort of set up a template for cutting the the nutty pine, assuming everything is square. And I was putting in 3 tacks at each furring strip here. But you know, it goes relatively fast. Here's the first wall is done. Nail gun allowed up to 2.5-inch 16 gauge brats. So you have 5/8 of thickness plus another 1/4 inch of thickness plus another inch of thickness before you are into something solid. So the 2.5-inch was adequate. So yes, getting the unit as tight as possible was kind of an ongoing objective throughout the build. And again, this goes to the location of the stove. It goes to the notion of feeding it from the outside. And I also have a magnetic strip I can lay over the floor drain so that if I don't want the cold air to come in, it is blocked. So here we're done. And you know, you buy these boxes of 16 gauge brats, and I think there's 1,000 in a box. I ended up using about two boxes. But again, if you just imagine doing this by hand with a hammer, it could be done, but this was so much faster. Plus, the pinholes are so much smaller. These nutty pines were put in extremely tight, as tight as I could, and even so, after using the sauna, there was, you know, the drying out of the lumber and some separation. 20/20 hindsight, with better lumber prices, yes, I would have preferred to use tongue and groove, but again, that would have changed the inside price of this wall surface from, well, it was already over $400. It would have jumped to $800. So, again, you know, you have to make decisions at certain price points and go with it. Close up of the ripped-in router 2x4 studs, re-glued to create I think, an extremely cool and stylish looking bench. So my neighbor was set up to accomplish that in relatively short order, and I think it really added class to the place. The airflow is perfect. The benches by themselves are not super strong, so you still need a 2x4 support structure underneath it, but you know, that's okay. So here we're looking at the install. Rather than supporting it from below, I decided to hang it off the ceiling, which was fortuitous in that this area needed to be blocked off because of the heat coming off. Plus, I was able to put a radiant surface on there down the road. And then, you know, there are some guidelines as to the placement and the height of the benches. This bottom bench is on a slider, so you can actually slide it underneath or pull it out, which is nice as when you want to mop the floor. And then the floor was polyed with 5 layers of inside water-based poly. So it, I mean, it's treated lumber, so it's not like it couldn't handle the water, but I think the poly makes it a surface that's readily cleaned or mopped, all of that. Not part of the plan was this LED dimmable lighting. You know, you look at other plans and other examples online, and you go, you know, it would be really nice if we were to add that feature. And this was done prior to finishing the electrical. So, you know, if there was a time to do it, it was to do it now. So these shadow boxes for indirect dimmable mood lighting, I think, kind of turned out to be really nice. And at the same time, you go, well, we need some relaxation tunes inside the sauna. So I went with these marine waterproof Wi-Fi Bluetooth compatible speakers, rated to a max of 55C. 55C, what is that in Fahrenheit? 65, 100, 120, something like that. But anyway, they're far enough down to the floor where that's not an issue. And it'd be nice, you bring your cell phone, leave the cell phone in the dressing room, lock on to whatever tunes, and you're good to go. This is the LED supply online. They were able to set me up, and this was kind of a luxury, but I think it was well worth it. They sell waterproof 95C rated LEDs, and you can pick the color, the harshness of the lighting, or you can go with kind of a color disco scenario. I did not go with the color disco scenario. I went with the softest yellow, I think 2500K, not the 4000 super bright, and I think the results were good. I had to buy 2 lengths to complete what I needed to do lengthwise, so I had to solder 2 units, which was not too difficult, but you can see the effect here. I think the effect is nice. And again, so the benches worked out nice. The movable bench at below. I still plan on adding another bench here, so this becomes a U-shaped setup. But one person here, and 2 individuals in the middle at 4. And I think the max occupancy has been at 3 so far. So 1 or 2 is typically the norm. And with the dimmable surface, you can sort of dial it in any way you like. I left the wiring for the ceiling light, and that's an LED as well, but that LED would not work. I mean, it's dimmable, all of that, but it simply doesn't, especially at the ceiling where temperatures are over 200 on a regular basis, 200 Fahrenheit, 95, 100 C. I don't think the light would have lasted. So that's just strictly a working light when the sauna is not in use. Outside trimmings. Surrounded the unit with solar-powered night lights. I have used this particular brand around the house, other places, now for almost 3 years. And, they are maintenance-free. Their rechargeable batteries are able to keep up. Very nice. I had an old transfer box for an outside generator that I repurposed. This was a 240 4-prong hookup, so I retired one of the 3, kept it at 110. And then again, the neighbor was kind enough to use his wood shop to take existing siding and transform that into a door, both on the inside and on the outside. So aesthetically, extremely pleasing. Moving to the inside, to the wiring, something that needs to be thought of early on, keeping the wiring away from the heat. And then you say, well, do I need a regular outlet? Yeah, sure you do. If you want a vacuum or some power tools or whatever, you have it. So this is the dimmable main light, which we don't use except for when we're cleaning. Off on for the LEDs with the dimmable portion, and then the dimmable LED in the dressing room. You're looking at the dressing room under construction, wires still hanging out. And like I said, 20/20 hindsight, if this would have been an 8x12, this space would have widened by 12 inches, which I think would have been nice. But it is what it is. And I think we're still going to add another bench here as well, using the same method of the inside benches. Then in the summertime, the door is open, so you have this magnetic mosquito screen that was added, so you can keep the door open, so you don't end up with mosquitoes inside. And again, there's the transfer box extension cord. I talked about the mishap when the unit got to about 260, 270, and this plastic bucket was sitting right about there with that side to the stove, and it decided that, okay, it's time to melt. But like I said, the unit was able to, the isolation distances, from a fire safety rating. Would I do it on purpose? No, but the unit, the sauna, withstood the temperature abuse. And there are always annoying phone calls. So you can see the door on the inside, nicely routed out, allowed for expansion and all of those standard carpentry tricks. Little gravity 15-minute timer, and also obviously this is not something that at my age is an issue, but I already noticed that step is a little bit too high for people that are somewhat up in age, something that needs to be addressed. Some last minute tweaks. I figured that in the wintertime, if you're inside for 10-15 minutes and it's 0 degrees out, you just go outside and cool off real nicely. That sort of goes away come April, May, June, and I noticed that Amazon was selling these dunking buckets, and if they were available, they wanted quite a pretty penny for those. And it's relatively straightforward to make your own. So you got an 8-gallon bucket from Home Depot, or no, not an 8-gallon, $8 one, and I think it's like 4 gallons. And then a little floating valve from Amazon that farmers use for their watering buckets for their cattle, animals. Kind of a hinge, and you just pull on that, and you get a 30-second dose of 4 gallons of cold water, and that has turned out to be a really nice thing to do. Because if it's 70, 80, 90 degrees out, and you come outside a 200-degree sauna, you need something to give you the temperature difference. And using my Fitbit, I was able to slow my heart rate by about 30 or 40. I would come out and I'd be beating at 160, take the old plunge, and it would be down to 120 within 30 seconds. Which is what we needed. Also, since we had that mishap where we melted the bucket, I decided to sort of enclose the chimney and the stove fully, and I also added a little, not needed, but I wrapped the cement board with some of that aluminum colored or copper colored aluminum. And again, here's a squeegee to do the floor, keep it dry. It's radiating into the room, and if you look, I have 2 fans. I have two fans that distribute the hot air throughout the sauna, pushing it in two different directions, and that seems to work out really well. Wrapping things up, little privacy wall which then lend itself for the stacking of the oak firewood. Already a couple of woodchucks helped themselves, and they are no longer part of this universe. But it was, nice to keep it nearby. Wood is being fed from the outside, and I think I have enough here for several years. And we have a little tarp that keeps things nice and dry. So that's kind of it. There are plenty of videos on YouTube on how to build a sauna. I think this video is unique in that, and there are always interruptions. But I think, this final image shows you the splash guard has some leftover of that copper-colored aluminum. You pull on the cord, you stand on this tile here, and it seems to work really well. Powered by garden hose, which of course come October would be no longer used or needed. The hood over the stove, this is facing east, keeps most of the moisture, rainfall off the unit. Used some black stove paint to kind of tie things in with the cement board. We got the power to be hooked up, solar lights, and if needed, this unit could be easily pulled up on a trailer and moved if needed. And or even, I think the foundation is strong enough that you could put a metal frame underneath it with wheels and a hitch so that it could be towed. And so it is not a permanent structure on the property by any means. It is temporary by design. Other than that, I think this is kind of, what it took to get to this point. So we're at 45 minutes. I thank you for your time, and maybe I was able to provide you with some good suggestions. Thank you.